And the rising tensions in the Middle East are one of the top risks for 2024, according to a new report by Eurasia Group. But it actually doesn't top the list. Joining us now, the co-author of that report, president and founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media, Ian Bremmer. So, Ian, what in the world could be number one? Let's go right to that. What is the top threat?
Yeah, Mika, there are three wars that we're facing this year. The Russia-Ukraine war facing a turning point. We're not very happy about where it's going. The Middle East, which is about to escalate significantly. And number one, the United States versus itself. And there's no question in each of these three wars, you have principals, leaders that think of their opponents as their most important adversary, in some ways enemies of the people. They're willing to use extra legal means to go after them. And perhaps most worryingly, they do not share basic sets of facts in describing what their intentions are, what they're fighting over, and what victory would mean. That's a very disturbing set of conflicts on the global stage today. And the fact that, number one, I mean, we really had no choice but to list the United States as number one. Usually there's an internal debate. But both, given the impact, the scale, and the imminence of what we're facing in the United States this 2024, I don't see what else we possibly could have written.
I would like to dig deeper into that, because with the Middle East roiling and every day the potential for this escalating into a much wider, much more dangerous, much more close to home war, I guess my questions are, what kind of data and information caused Eurasia Group to make America against itself the number one threat?
Well, if you look at we've been doing this, we're around for 26 years now, and the way we rank these likelihood, imminence, and impact. So, of course, the fact that the United States is not just facing an election that is increasingly seen as illegitimate by large percentages of the population, but also the scale of impact of any problems with U.S. democracy for the rest of the world. I mean, you travel around the world, and the level of concern and worry about what this will mean for American commitment, American policies, American alliances, and, of course, opportunities for American adversaries, vastly greater than anything else. So you have to look at those different metrics when you're considering what are the most important risks out there. But, I mean, when we look at the United States, remember, this is only looking at 1 year ahead. So we're not even looking at what's happening after the inauguration in 2025. I think one of the biggest issues is that when Trump gets the nomination, which is, certainly not certain, but it's very, very likely, and you've been talking about this every morning, that his suddenly going to be a vastly more powerful figure on the American domestic stage. The Republican Party will line up with him overwhelmingly with loyalty. He will have the media focusing on him far more than they are today. He'll have a lot more money to play with as well. And suddenly Trump's policies, which right now are, they're pronouncements that are covered, in the context of someone running, but they will be policies that essentially reflect the leadership of the Republican Party going into 2024. And that, for issues like Ukraine, like the Middle East, like the border, suddenly the Overton window for what is debated in the United States is going to change very dramatically. And again, countries around the world are very, very concerned about this.
Ian, as you look at the risk and having the United States as number one, the attack on Israel, October 7th, all of us were outraged and stepped forward and said, this is unacceptable. We can't have this. But then we've also denounced many that are with Israel on that, what is going on with Netanyahu in terms of what's going on in Gaza, and feel the killing babies and innocent civilians that we objected to or raised our voice to in Israel was also unacceptable in Gaza. There's a human rights thing. Right. But the United States seems, in terms of the Biden administration, not to be able to deal with, you can be pro-Israel and anti-Netanyahu. And then when you see the killing of this Hamas leader and the risk that it brings when you have al-Aruri killed in a Hezbollah area, does all of this combined make it even more risky for where the United States goes, seeming to have an imbalance in terms of not being able to take Netanyahu to task publicly without looking like they're anti-Israel because one has nothing to do with the other?
I think it's a lot harder in this environment. It's certainly true that one can be anti-Netanyahu without being anti-Israel. That, by the way, would describe the vast majority of the Israeli people who certainly feel that way. But when you're talking about the war, you're talking not about Netanyahu, but the war cabinet. And that war, as it is being fought and as it is being escalated, is supported by the vast majority of the Israeli people. So the United States, as the principal major ally of Israel in the world, is really stapled to that outcome and is isolated in the way it is stapled to that outcome. I mean, the United States today, only 3 months after the worst violence perpetrated against the Jews since the Holocaust, the United States, in its support for Israel, is more isolated on the global stage than Russia was when it invaded Ukraine 2 years ago. That's a staggering and shocking thing to say, but it's a reality, and it's a problem for Biden, not just on the global stage where he's losing support, but also on the domestic stage where this is clearly going to be an election issue that will hurt him in 2024.
So I'm curious, I mean, obviously you're a foreign policy expert. You've been covering this for a long time. If Donald Trump were to be reelected president of the United States, where do you think things look like next year in 2025 on the global stage in terms of where the United States is? You know, what does the Middle East look like? Does it shift things there? Does it shift things in Russia, Ukraine? I mean, what kind of, I guess, danger, I would say, does it further put the world in if Donald Trump were to become president again?
Allies are a lot more concerned this time around than they were in 2016, 2020. I think part of that is because the world is so much more dangerous. Remember, Trump's president for 4 years, but there weren't really major global crises on his watch. Now, he uses that in election line, but it also means that other countries around the world weren't as worried about his instability, his volatility, the uncertainty of what he would do if there was a crisis. This is a very different environment. Talk about the Middle East. I mean, when President Trump faced a much smaller crisis in terms of the Iranians continuing to attack American allies and U.S. bases, he went and he ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian forces. Well, what might Trump do to display American strength in an environment where U.S. forces and shipping through the Red Sea are getting hit almost every day? And the answer is far more dangerous than that. Ukraine, no friend, Mr. Zelensky, of President Trump. If he becomes president, his willingness to throw Zelensky under the bus is large and immediate. And of course, that means that Ukraine's ability to maintain its existing territory, much, much more challenging. The U.S. ability to maintain a strong transatlantic alliance with critical friends in NATO, much more concerning too. One more point. I was just in China a few weeks ago, and Chinese leaders who frankly were interested in Trump the first time around thought he's a businessman, he's transactional, maybe he doesn't care about American exceptionalism. We can cut a deal with this guy. They are very concerned about Trump this time around. They're concerned about the instability on the global stage, and they're also concerned about what a Trump trade policy would mean for U.S.-China. And you've seen some of that from Lighthizer recently, expected to be in a second Trump administration if he wins. All of these things are very concerning indeed.
So, Ian, lastly and briefly, you identify on your list some red herrings of 2024 with U.S.-China relations at the top. Tell us what you mean.
Well, first of all, so many people talk about all these elections happening in 2024. The U.S. election is very concerning. Most of the elections the world is facing are not destabilizing at all. India, Mexico, Europe. These are places where you will get what you have had, and leaders will be able to push ahead with further reforms, further policies. So it's not like the rest of the world looks like the U.S. in terms of democracy here. That's important. U.S.-China this year look like the adults in the room. It's not because they like each other. It's not because there's trust. Rather, it's because there are so many major crises that they're trying to create some stability, and also keep in mind that China's economy is doing very badly indeed. It's not about to turn around in 2024, and that makes Xi Jinping more cautious, not facing political challenges at home, but doesn't want to escalate. And that informs the way we've seen far more high-level engagement between the U.S. and China the last few months. That should stick through 2024. That's one of the bright spots this year.
Tumultuous times. President and founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media, Ian Bremmer. Thank you very much for coming on this morning.
Great to be with you.